Good morning and welcome to IU Sports Sunday on this 14th day of September. In 2025, the non-conference slate is in the books for Indiana football, and we get to the meat and potatoes of the schedule very, very quickly. Welcome along. I'm Nick Rodecap with you from the WGCL studios in Bloomington. Thanks so much for spending part of your Sunday morning with us. We've got plenty to talk about. Not just in the world of Indiana football, but also in the world of Indiana football. Now, that's the kind of football that's played on a pitch with boots instead of cleats and kits instead of uniforms. Indiana men's soccer, arguably more interesting given the caliber of opponent than what happened with Indiana football this weekend. And yes, there were plenty of historic moments from IU football's dominant 73-0 win over Indiana State, which went, I would say, just about as everybody expected it to. People saying, oh, Indiana needs to play a real team in the non-conference schedule. I give you Old Dominion. Old Dominion, and I said this the day after Indiana hosted Old Dominion in week one. They looked like a good team. They showed flashes, and sure, Colton Joseph threw 3 interceptions, and Indiana was still able to prevail with a 2-score win. But the Monarchs look like they could give some people a very tough time in the Sun Belt this year. A dominant win for Old Dominion over Brent Pry's Virginia Tech Hokies, 45-26 in Blacksburg. So that is a week one win that could, as the season goes on, look better and better for the Hoosiers. Now, Curt Cignetti, if you think back, he talked about Old Dominion. He spoke very highly of the Monarchs. He said these Sun Belt teams are tough. He talked about how Old Dominion nearly beat South Carolina on the road last year, a very tough place to play. Virginia Tech, on the other hand, was not having fun against ODU. Booed off the field at halftime. Brent Pry falling to 16-24 in his tenure with the Hokies. But on behalf of Indiana, I would like to thank him because he makes Indiana's win over ODU look very good. Now, there's also a chance that Virginia Tech's head coach Brent Pry will not make it to the end of the season. But again, no wins are guaranteed against Sun Belt teams in college football. And Curt Cignetti, a former Sun Belt coach, knows that better than anyone. So the Hoosiers not facing that same caliber of opponent this past Friday. And I am of the opinion that Friday night should be exclusively for high school football. Especially this week because we had both Terre Haute and Bloomington seeing their North versus South high school games taking place. So I feel bad because you had IU football facing Indiana State, taking away from the in-city rivalry games in the world of high school football in 2 separate places in Indiana, directly perhaps impacting the attendance for both of those. And I know it's not Indiana's fault. It's not Indiana State's fault. It's the fault of the TV executives who determine which game kicks off at what time. And that's what happened with Indiana State. It's not exactly an appetizing game, so that's why it kicked off on Friday. But I do think you can still take away plenty of this for Indiana. A lot of positives from this one, and I understand the caliber of opponent kind of needs to be mentioned, obviously. Indiana State under Curt Mallory, the son of course, Indiana former head coach Bill Mallory. It's important to note Curt Mallory has not had a lot of success in Indiana State, but Indiana looked much better just in terms of rhythm, in terms of execution on all sides than it has as a collective unit in either of the other 2 non-conference games. And I think that's the important thing to take away from this is that Indiana now looks like it's in a lot better shape to face Illinois under the lights this coming Saturday than Indiana was even just 2 weeks ago. The Hoosiers in much better shape. Fernando Mendoza nearly perfect against the Sycamores. 19 of 20, 270 passing yards, 6 total touchdowns, 5 of them through the air, just one off tying the IU single-game record, which was tied last by Curtis Rourke against Purdue in that 66-0 victory back in November of 2024. And there was a time before Indiana scored its final touchdown where it was 66-0 in favor of the Hoosiers, and I thought, I wonder if we've seen that score at Memorial Stadium before. I think that puts into perspective just how bad 2024 Purdue was. But Mendoza began the game 14 of 14 through the air. There was a legitimate chance that he was going to equal the Indiana record for consecutive completions, which is at 20, according to the IU Sports Information folks. Mendoza couldn't quite get there, but I think he'll be okay with a 95% completion percentage. Mendoza, after the game, talking about how, as he has in all 3 post-game press conferences in which we've had the chance to speak to him, he's talked about how there are still some missed opportunities that he's got to clean up. And it's amazing that the quarterback can go 19 of 20 and say, yeah, I can be better. I think that speaks to his work ethic, his drive to see Indiana play at its peak. Curt Cignetti got in his ear on the sideline. There was a moment on the broadcast where Cignetti was clearly frustrated with some of Mendoza's decision-making when it comes to whether he should hand the ball off, keep it for himself, or pass on some of those triple option plays. And Cignetti told him in no uncertain terms to hand the ball off in more colorful language than I can repeat. But Mendoza comes out of that timeout after getting chewed out by his head coach and makes a really nice play and finds the end zone for Indiana. And that's what being coachable looks like. That's what you want from your quarterback. Fernando's brother Alberto also completing a pair of touchdown passes. The Mendozas combined to throw for 7 touchdowns, and Omar Cooper tied the late James Hardy, catching 4 of them. 10 catches, 207 yards, 4 TDs. Plenty of those yards, over 130, came after the catch. And I thought one of the more impressive things that did not show up on the stat sheet was Elijah Surratt's performance in the blocking game, because a lot of those yards for Omar Cooper came on wide receiver screens. And Elijah Surratt did a good job sealing off the edge, allowing Cooper to cut back inside and gain plenty of yards after the catch. Now, of course, you will say Indiana State, not exactly the most physical, most talented opponent. I agree with you there, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But that's one thing that Elijah Surratt said he really prides himself on, is his blocking in the run game and in the pass game on those wide receiver screens, because that's a point of focus for the entire wide receiver group. And when we talked to Omar Cooper, he told us the same thing. It was saying, hey, you can be good at blocking if you want to, and for Indiana, it's an effort thing. So Surratt setting the example and allowing Omar Cooper to sprint away from everybody. Cooper had 207 receiving yards, and Indiana had 8 other pass catchers in that game, but nobody else had more than 3 receptions. So Omar Cooper, more touchdown catches than any other Indiana player had receptions in total. I beg the question, is that good? And I think the answer is yes. So plenty of positives for Indiana to take into Illinois. An extra day of rest being among them after playing on a short week. The Hoosiers had Saturday off. But I think what you're also looking at is Curt Cignetti's assessment of the game. And that is one where he felt like the coaches brought the intensity, the players did as well from start to finish. And that was something Indiana had not done in both of its previous games, I should say. It was better against Kennesaw State, but against Old Dominion, Cignetti said there were definitely some folks, especially on the sidelines, whose focus and intensity from start to finish were not up to snuff. But Cignetti said that he did not see anybody relaxing, coaches or players on the sidelines, even as the game really was over by halftime, which is a very good thing to see, because when you've got your entire team focused for the entire game, you're going to be better off for it. And I think that's also part of why you saw the high degree of execution for Indiana. And the Hoosiers dialed in 3-0, hosting Illinois in a ranked matchup on NBC on Saturday night. I am very excited for that game, and you should be too. It's one that will have massive college football playoff implications. There's a chance for rain in the morning, but because it's a primetime kick, I think we should be okay weather-wise. But thinking about the potential outcomes of that game, if Indiana is to lose, then the Hoosiers will have a mountain to climb, because UCLA and Tino Sunseri and Nico Iamaleava, well, that's not going to be a marquee win if Indiana is able to take care of business against the Bruins. Michigan State, not going to move the needle quite enough. Wisconsin, after the Badgers' performance against Alabama, no. So really, you've got to beat Illinois, and I would say either Oregon or Penn State to secure an at-large bid to the college football playoff. It's going to be fun. I think having a high-stakes game like this to open Big Ten play is a very good thing for all parties involved. Now, there was another Indiana team that had a high-stakes match to open its Big Ten slate yesterday. Did not go the way many people were expecting. We'll talk about that right after this. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday on WGCL. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. We talked before the break that a certain Indiana football, wink, wink, nudge, nudge team opened Big Ten play yesterday. Not talking about the gridiron. I'm talking about on the pitch. Number one Indiana men's soccer is not going to be number one anymore. That ranking lasting for 1 week. And I know I say I don't put too much stock in rankings, but it was still pretty cool. I had the privilege of being on the call on Big Ten Plus last night as Indiana men's soccer opened conference play against Michigan and was upset by the Wolverines falling 3-2. And the Hoosiers suffered their first defeat in 7 matches this season. It was a thrilling win for the Wolverines. Head coach Shaka Daly, no stranger to playing spoiler when coaching against Todd Yeagley. It's been a while, but in the Big Ten tournament last year, 7th-seeded Michigan, one of the last teams into the tournament, upset 2nd-seeded and Big Ten regular season co-champion Indiana. 1-0 after losing to the Hoosiers 5-0 in the regular season. Future MLS Super Draft first-round pick Jason Buckner, his goal would be the difference in the end. That was in the postseason last year. And even more impressively, the Wolverines come in facing what is, by all weights and measures, a much better Indiana men's soccer team, and winning after trailing 1-0, scoring 3 of the game's final 4 goals, including 2 in the second half, to upset Indiana and send the Hoosier Army home unhappy for the first time this season. Indiana had a chance to equalize in the final 5 minutes. Palmer Alt took a penalty kick. Alt, Indiana's leading scorer, 2 for 2 on penalty kicks this season, but he was denied by a combination of Michigan keeper Isaiah Goldson and the right goalpost. It was one of 3 times a player found the post on that end of the field on the night, which, if I had a nickel, it would be weird. I wouldn't have a lot of nickels, but it's weird that it happened 3 times in one match. Twice, though, to the benefit of Indiana, and I think that's kind of the key, is that Indiana got some help from the iron a couple of times. Michigan shots denied, not by Holden Brown, but by the woodwork, if you will. The Wolverines played frenetically out of the gates, and although Indiana took the early lead, Michigan played an extremely physical game and was able to tie it up 1-1 just before halftime on a penalty kick. Go into half, you feel like it's still pretty good shape for Indiana because the Hoosiers have multiple come-from-behind wins to their credit already this season, or come-from-behind performances, a draw against Clemson, another national championship contender, a comeback win against USF, San Francisco, a comeback win against Green Bay as well. So you felt like Indiana was still in a good spot. But the Hoosiers unable to have the same degree of success scoring in the second half, despite, I would say, more chances just from the eye test, because Michigan came out of the gate, I think, taking the first 7 shots of the game before Indiana even got one on frame, which was very, very puzzling. It seemed like it was kind of one of those games where Indiana was threatening but just couldn't break through like it has in every match so far this season. Now, in the grand scheme of things, of course, Indiana, I don't think, is going to be too worried because Todd Yeagley, at least after the first half, said he felt like Indiana played pretty well. But the Hoosiers will take on Penn State this Friday, looking to rebound after an upset loss to open Big Ten play. And I think that it's important to keep perspective that you still got 2/3 of the season minus 1 match to make your case for the NCAA tournament, and Indiana has made it nearly 40 consecutive years, so I'm not concerned at all about that. I think Michigan just played a really physical brand of soccer that got Indiana a little off kilter, a little unsettled. There were a lot of fouls in last night's game. The Wolverines just playing very, very tough. 21 fouls committed by Michigan. A lot of cards, a lot of bookings. 3 Michigan players yellow carded, 2 for Indiana. And that tracks with how the game seemed to shape out. There were a lot of time-wasting tactics by Michigan as well. The referees were wise to it, though. But overall, a very, very good win for the Michigan Wolverines as they look to make it back to the NCAA tournament for the second consecutive year. And for Indiana, the question is now, okay, you're still going to have a target on your back regardless of where you're ranked. Indiana men's soccer falling 3-2 to Michigan yesterday in its first game since 2021 as the number 1 ranked team in the country. And you're going to still have a target on your back, especially in Big Ten play. Everybody knows to look out for a Todd Yeagley coach team because he's so consistent at getting the best out of his players. And that was one of the things that Michigan's head coach, Shaka Daly, complimented him on yesterday before the game, was how no matter who's in the fold for Indiana, the Hoosiers are going to be competitive. And he spoke very highly of Todd Yeagley, as everybody does. Indiana, very good, especially on second chances. Indiana scored a second chance goal yesterday, so that definitely coming to fruition. But Daly ultimately able to get the best of Todd Yeagley in the end. Michigan winning for just the 6th time in 36 meetings with Indiana. Speaks to how one-sided that series has been overall. But the Wolverines getting the better of the Hoosiers at Bill Armstrong Stadium as Indiana men's soccer lost at home for the first time in nearly a full year. Indiana's last home loss before yesterday was on September 21st, 2024. So 51 weeks ago today. Which, if I remember correctly, that game was a suspended game. It began on Friday night and finished on Saturday morning before Indiana football took on Charlotte in Biff Poggi's visit to Bloomington. But definitely some kinks to iron out for Indiana, although if you're expecting the Hoosiers to go unbeaten, well, I think that's very wishful thinking for any team, especially when there is so much parity in college soccer, and there tends to be a lot of chaos in the Big Ten. So Todd Yeagley looking to make some adjustments before Indiana men's soccer heads to Happy Valley and takes on Penn State this Friday. That's a rematch of the 2023 Big Ten championship game, which Indiana won by a score of 1-0 here in Bloomington. So as for Indiana gridiron football, the Hoosiers are set up for what will be one of the biggest games in program history, not just at Memorial Stadium, but for my money overall. Illinois coming in, Indiana as well, 3-0. The Hoosiers, again, focusing less on the score against Indiana State and more Curt Cignetti's impressions and Indiana's progression throughout conference play as a cohesive unit. I think that's the big key. Fernando Mendoza, if you remember back to week 1, 15 days ago, he was not in rhythm. Curt Cignetti said Mendoza missed some throws. Indiana also had some drops. And it felt like the offense, especially in the red zone, was really laboring. But Mendoza looked very, very good on Friday. His timing was about as perfect as you could ask for on his throws. I thought he threw a ball particularly beautifully to the back of the end zone. I believe it was caught by Jonathan Brady, but I could be wrong. It was an out route that ended up in the far corner of the end zone, and he dropped it in the bucket. There were another couple of throws that I was impressed by. One to Elijah Surratt on an out route where he basically put it in Surratt's hip pocket. And if Surratt wasn't going to make the catch, nobody was. Those are the kinds of throws that he's going to need to make consistently against teams like Illinois. And Mendoza definitely showing major strides. Who would have thought that live reps allow quarterbacks to improve and work on their timing with receivers? I know, it's almost like Curt Cignetti said, hey, live reps are good. We needed to have the first teamers out there a little bit longer because they needed to execute over an extended period of time. That's what he said after Kennesaw State. And the same was true against Indiana State on Friday. Now, there was a drawback to Indiana leaving the first teamers out. As long as they did, and it came in the form of an injury to one of the first-team running backs, Lee Beebe. He suffered a non-contact injury, looked like to his leg. Hard to tell from my vantage point in the press box. Could not see it particularly well on replays either, but it looked like it was a non-contact leg injury to Indiana running back Lee Beebe, part of that three-headed monster in the Indiana backfield. Cignetti said Beebe's condition not known immediately post-game, but that Indiana should find out more either Sunday or Monday. So today or tomorrow, we should know more about the condition of Lee Beebe, and I imagine that in the press conference tomorrow, that'll be probably one of the first questions asked, because if Beebe went down, generally non-contact injuries are the ones that are the biggest causes for concern when it comes to perhaps a season ending or an injury in which a player can miss an extended period of time. Now, the positive for Indiana is that Kobe Martin, the redshirt freshman running back who we saw flashes of in, I'm not going to say garbage time, but in late game situations where the score was decided last year, Kobe Martin looked really good playing with the second teamers. Martin with a pair of touchdown rushes. He was actually Indiana's leading rusher on Friday. Martin averaged 9.9 yards on 11 carries, a pair of touchdowns there as well. So Cignetti, I'm sure, if Lee Beebe is out for an extended period of time, will have no problem turning to Kobe Martin and elevating him to that first-team running back role. Indiana's offensive line has been very good at creating running lanes and giving Fernando Mendoza plenty of time, but they are going to be tested mightily against Illinois on Saturday. We'll talk a little bit more about college football through Week 3 and especially where Indiana stands in respect to the college football playoff right after this here on IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rodecap with you. College football playoff, I know it's really early, but beginning to take a little bit of shape, not necessarily with who's in, but who is likely out. And look away, Reverse Jacket fans, because one of those teams that is way closer to the outside than the inside is Notre Dame. And I know you're saying, oh, well, Notre Dame has played 2 ranked opponents and lost by a combined 4 points. Well, here's the rest of your schedule, Irish fans. Purdue, Arkansas, Boise State, North Carolina State, USC, Boston College, Navy, Pittsburgh, Syracuse, Stanford. For all the shouting about how prior to the college football playoff game last year in South Bend, Indiana did not beat a ranked team. Notre Dame, you lost to the only 2 ranked teams on your schedule. Yikes. I like Marcus Freeman. I do. And I'm not going to speak on Notre Dame at length, mostly because I was calling IU men's soccer and I have not had a chance to watch Notre Dame Texas A&M. I know there was a last-second touchdown that decided the game for the Aggies on the road in South Bend, but I have no analysis to offer. What I will say is that Notre Dame's schedule from here on out is very soft, which I know it's shocking that Notre Dame has a soft schedule for most of the season. That's what happens when you don't join a conference. Now, I understand why Notre Dame is not in a conference, and especially after making the national championship game last year, the Irish have no reason to be in a conference from a financial standpoint. But when you basically play an ACC schedule that features right now a couple of Big Ten teams, you lost to the only good SEC team on your schedule, and Boise State, as well as the Naval Academy, it's not exactly eye-popping to the committee. So I think there is an argument that even if Notre Dame wins out, the Irish might not make the CFP. They would need some help, I think. I'll put it that way. So that's good for Indiana's sake, especially if the Hoosiers are able to take down Illinois on Saturday night. Speaking of ACC teams that are on the outside looking in as it relates to the college football playoff, let's talk about former Indiana head coach Tom Allen's Clemson Tigers. We kind of figured that Clemson was a little bit on the struggle bus when it fell at home to LSU. We raised our eyebrows even more when Clemson trailed Troy 16-3 at halftime last week. That was really puzzling. Now, after Georgia Tech beats Clemson on a walk-off 55-yard fire drill field goal, which, by the way, that was awesome. Dabo Swinney and his Tigers are in a world of hurt. Perhaps, despite Tom Allen being the defensive coordinator, they don't love each other quite enough. Rest of the season for Clemson is as follows: Syracuse, North Carolina, Boston College, Southern Methodist, Duke, Florida State, Louisville, Furman, and South Carolina. The only ranked team on that schedule, pending the AP poll today, is Florida State. And I know you're going to say, wait a minute, but South Carolina is ranked. South Carolina is going to crater out of the top 25, I think. They should at least. Losing 31-7 at home to Vanderbilt. The Commodores picking up their first ranked win on the road since 2007. The big caveat to that is Lenora Sellers' injury. And it's very unfortunate because Sellers is one of the better quarterbacks in all of college football. He was taken out after a helmet-to-helmet hit from Vanderbilt's Langston Patterson, who was ejected for targeting. Shane Beamer said that it's tough, obviously, when you lose your starting quarterback. That's not exactly rocket science. But South Carolina should at least fall to the fringes of the top 25. And the thing about concussions is that you don't want to rush back from them. So it's a question of how much time LaNorris Sellers misses for South Carolina. And strictly for the sake of CFP implications, that, again, could benefit Indiana. And let me be clear, I'm not wishing injury on anyone because college football is a better place when talented players like LaNorris Sellers are healthy. Don't get me wrong. It's something, though, where Indiana has to take advantage of the opportunities it is given, and there is a massive, massive opportunity to pick up a resume win on Saturday night as Illinois comes to town. The Illini finished their non-conference slate against Western Michigan, a 38-0 shutout win. Luke Altmaier, 3 touchdowns accounted for the Illini. Now, the one question I have about Illinois, obviously Illinois, a very good team. There is absolutely no doubt about that. I cannot tell you, and again, this is why we play the game, I cannot tell you whether or not whether or not Illinois is better than Indiana. I think AP voters have overvalued Illinois a little bit after that bowl win over South Carolina last year, because this is where you get into one of the side effects of AP SEC bias is that you're very high on an SEC team purely because they're in the SEC, and that bias carries throughout the season based on things like quality losses and hypotheticals and things that don't actually decide the outcome of games. That's my only question. Illinois is obviously a very good team. I don't think they're going to win the Big Ten, but they're certainly going to give a scare to every team they face in conference play this year. That win over Duke, Illinois winning 45-19, one of the most misleading final scores I think you'll ever see, because Duke committed 5 turnovers and had a whole host of self-inflicted mistakes in that game. My question is Illinois a team that can take on an opponent like Indiana on the road if Indiana plays a clean game? What's that going to look like? And, well, we've got 6 days until we find out. I'm very excited. I mean, these are the kinds of games that if you would have told anybody who followed Indiana football that the Hoosiers would be playing in 2 years ago, they would have said, "You're crazy, there's no chance." Because Indiana got the CBS game to open the 2023 season and could not score a touchdown against Ohio State. So you've got a ranked matchup, potentially a top 15 matchup in Bloomington on primetime television. That's going to be an absolute blast. Surely College Game Day will come here, right? No. I don't know why you'd be surprised by College Game Day not coming to Bloomington. There was an outside chance that we thought maybe they would, but for whatever reason, even after Florida quarterback DJ Lagway threw 5 interceptions yesterday as LSU went into the swamp, hosted Florida, and LSU winning that game 20-10. Brian Kelly not very happy after the game. But Florida, after a 2-week stretch in which it lost in a shocking upset to USF at home, and then goes to LSU and has its quarterback throw 5 interceptions, ESPN says, bring us College Game Day in Miami. Let's go to South Florida and do game day from the site of what will likely be a bloodbath at Hard Rock Stadium. Miami might win that game by 60, but ESPN hates the Big Ten that much that they decided no. Top 15 matchup in Bloomington, one of the best college towns in the nation? No. We hate the Big Ten so much, we are not going to give our viewers what would objectively be a phenomenal viewing experience. And that is a shame, but it's one that I think was expected. It's a decision that, if you've kept up with ESPN's treatment of Indiana, is not at all surprising. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you, and after hearing the Ramones at a couple IU football games this year, I'm thinking, man, I didn't realize how much Green Day was influenced by them. I'm taking a history of punk rock class right now, and I knew, obviously, that the Ramones, one of the biggest influences on a whole host of bands in the world of punk rock. You could argue they ushered punk rock into the American populace, but you listen to the Ramones and then you listen to Green Day and you're like, yeah, I get it now. I certainly get it now. What I don't get is why College Game Day hates fun. And I know you're going to say, what? It's one of the coolest pregame shows out there. Probably the coolest pregame show out there. And I'll say, yeah, but if they really knew what was good for them, the folks at ESPN would want to come to Bloomington this weekend for a top 15 matchup between two Big Ten rivals. But no, they're going to go to South Beach, or they're not going to go to South Beach. They're going to go to one of the places surrounding Miami proper, probably Miami Gardens, because that's where Hard Rock Stadium is. And they're going to have to find a way to hype up what is going to be, in all likelihood, a complete slaughter fest. Miami taking on Florida. And I get it, it's an in-state rivalry, but dude, really? I mean, if you're going to shill for your conference media partners, ESPN, I'm talking to you. If you're going to shill for the SEC and the ACC, at least try to hide it. At least try. But no, it's shameless and it's pathetic. And at the same time, it's not at all surprising because, like I said before, ESPN's brazen hatred for Indiana. ESPN showed a graphic of, quote, notable games, and I know this is always a graphic of just the games that are on the ESPN family of networks. But objectively speaking, going into yesterday, Miami, South Florida was a notable game. They didn't put it on the graphic. Instead, they put Texas UTSA, or was it UTEP? It was UTEP, sorry. By the way, Arch Manning, we need to have a conversation about him. ESPN put the graphic saying that Texas UTEP was a notable game. Maybe it was notable because Arch Manning stinks at quarterback and was vastly overhyped going into the season, just like anybody with a pulse could have told you, including me. I'm far from the only one to say that, though, and I am still of the belief, this is the SEC's favorite word, if Arch Manning had a less notable last name, like perhaps Rotacap, if his name was Arch Rotacap, maybe he'd be some distant, long-lost half-cousin of mine or something. I've got family in Texas, in that part of the country, in that neck of the woods, so it's not entirely out of the question. But if his name was Arch Rotacap or Arch Signetti, that's actually a pretty cool name. If his last name wasn't Manning, I don't think he'd be the starting quarterback at Texas. You've got people saying that this guy's the best quarterback prospect since sliced bread. I don't know, man. I'd take Fernando Mendoza over Arch Manning any day of the week. And I think most people with a pulse would too. Fernando Mendoza will be tested this weekend against Illinois. But I'm confident. He's confident. Always striving to improve. Curt Cignetti never satisfied, as has become the norm. The Hoosiers have a chance to make a statement on national television on NBC in the middle of September, which, if you think back to 1 year ago today, that was Indiana's blowout win over UCLA in the Rose Bowl. That was one of the games that put Indiana on the map nationally. And the Hoosiers said, hey, we're here. We're not college football's doormat anymore. So maybe, perhaps, another statement win just a little bit over a year ago to the day, or excuse me, a year later to the day coming up this weekend. But only time will tell. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. the more I think about ESPN's decision to send College Game Day to Miami next weekend instead of Bloomington, the less sense it seems to make. You could have one of the biggest Big Ten games of the season in Indiana versus Illinois. You could be here for that. And I know you're going to say, well, ESPN isn't broadcasting the game, so why would they? But when Indiana hosted Washington last year, College Game Day was in town. That game was broadcast on the Big Ten Network. Was not even over the air. This game against Illinois this weekend is over the air. It's on NBC. So, argument invalid there. But it's not even just that they didn't pick Indiana, Illinois. It's that ESPN also did not pick a couple other marquee matchups. Michigan, Nebraska is one of them. Texas Tech, Utah, that's a ranked matchup. Nebraska might be ranked. Certainly two of the biggest brands in college football there, squaring off in Lincoln. But ESPN, for some reason, saw Florida quarterback DJ Lagway throw 5 interceptions. 5 picks. 5 picks against LSU. And said, yeah, that's our guy. We want a game, or College Game Day at a site where the final score is probably going to be so lopsided, most people who aren't Miami fans are going to tune out by the fourth quarter. Okay. For a network like ESPN that has so much power in dictating the way the average viewer, the average fan thinks about college football, they sure do a very poor job of promoting it. I've never seen such brazen dislike, disdain, outright hatred for a conference as I have with ESPN and the Big Ten. And I get it. ESPN didn't get in on the Big Ten's media contract, and so they're mad, and they want to promote the SEC, and they want to promote the ACC, but my goodness. At a certain point, enough is enough. I think it would be better for everybody involved as a college football fan if College Game Day came to Bloomington. Because ESPN has the rights to the CFP, and you can make a compelling case that both Indiana and Illinois will be in the college football playoff. Now, likely, I'm not going to say the winner of this game goes to the CFP, because that's not necessarily a guarantee. But certainly the winner of this game has a clear path to the college football playoff. That's the thing to me. It's that it seems like it would behoove ESPN to promote the sport, but what do I know? What do I know? As far as Indiana goes, if they just keep winning, College Game Day might be forced to show up. Now, the thing about it is, Indiana would be more likely to get it when they go on the road, say, to Oregon or to Penn State late in the season, if Indiana is still among the top teams in the Big Ten at that point. And there are a lot of unknowns with that. But definitely more likely that College Game Day would go to Eugene in mid-October or go to State College in early November than they would, say, come to Bloomington for homecoming against Michigan State. Although you think back to last year, that was the game. That was the homecoming game. I believe homecoming was Washington. It might have been Nebraska, but it was around homecoming weekend. The memory is spotty in my head. I think homecoming was Nebraska. Either way, it was around that time last year, week 8, week 9. So not entirely out of the question, but I can tell you that College Game Day will not be coming to Bloomington for Indiana's game against UCLA. Although, I mean, if you want to hype up a blowout, ESPN's proving with the Florida-Miami decision that maybe they do like hyping up blowouts. What in the world is going on with UCLA football? The Bruins 0-3, the lone winless team in the Big Ten. They look awful, putrid, stinky even, just bad. UCLA is really, really bad. And there's an Indiana connection there. Former quarterbacks coach Tino Sunseri jumped ship, headed to Westwood to join the Bruins after one season coaching under Curt Cignetti here in Bloomington. Tino went to be the offensive coordinator for UCLA, and oh no, that has not gone well. Nico Iamaleava, the poster child to be for everything that is wrong with NIL. Nico, after an okay season at Tennessee, in which his Volunteers made it to the college football playoff and got absolutely walloped at the Horseshoe by Ohio State. By the way, remember all those first-round games and how people said Indiana didn't deserve to belong? Well, Indiana's game was the closest out of all of them. Nico demanded a raise from Tennessee, got it initially, then asked for more money, and Tennessee told him to bounce. He goes to UCLA, and just awful play all around. It's not exclusively on him, but it's certainly easy for people to point the finger to Nico, given that he was demanding all this money. And Josh Heupel eventually said, you know what, champ, we're good. You can leave. We don't care. And he's got Joey Aguilar at the helm now. By the way, Tennessee, Georgia, probably a contender for game of the week, especially the way that game ended. Tennessee missing what could have been the game-winning field goal at the end of regulation. Their kicker was apparently doing breathing exercises on the sideline, which is never a good sign. But Nico could have been playing in front of 100,000 people at Neyland Stadium. Instead, he's stuck playing his home games at the Rose Bowl. And I know you're thinking, well, the Rose Bowl is a phenomenal venue. Not for UCLA football. A year ago today was when Indiana went out there. And one of the first things I noticed was the lack of UCLA fans. Now, driving in the Los Angeles Metro is like trying to do brain surgery while blindfolded with both arms behind your back, spinning in circles. It's impossible. So I understand, especially because the Rose Bowl it's not like it's on UCLA's campus. It's very far from campus, actually. Up to an hour away, depending on traffic. So I understand the poor turnout. My question to Nico is, were there any other incentives besides money and being close to home that led you to depart from Tennessee and go to a city where nobody cares about your football program? Because Tennessee fans, I can tell you from experience, are some of the most passionate in the nation, in any sport, college or professional. It's unbelievable. With that comes a lot of pressure, and I guess if Nico didn't want the pressure, then yeah, you got it. Nobody in Southern California cares about UCLA football. And you could tell because watching that broadcast as New Mexico defeated UCLA 35-10. By the way, that's a New Mexico program that basically had to start from scratch coming in this year because literally everybody left. New Mexico put a whooping on UCLA. The only thing you could hear on the broadcast were little kids screaming. That's not a good thing at a college football game. Ideally, you'd want to hear some students making some noise, some fans getting loud on big third downs. That just wasn't the case. I don't think Deshaun Foster, UCLA's head coach, makes it to the end of the season. Now, I can't entirely fault him. I mean, UCLA, at least in the early going, had more success with Ethan Garbers at quarterback than Nico. And I don't have the exact figures because nobody knows how much players actually get in terms of NIL. But I think it's very clear that Nico Iamaleava is part of the problem with UCLA, and I would feel bad for him. I would feel bad for the rest of that program, but it's entirely his fault. He got greedy because he had people in his ear, and this is a very common thing with NIL now. He had people in his ear telling him he was worth way more than he actually is. And he took that to heart, didn't get what he wanted from Tennessee, so he chased the bag. He chased the money. And my question is, did anybody tell him about California taxes and the cost of living, especially in the LA metro area? Because it's no joke. It's no joke. That's the only place I've ever been, Southern California, where I saw gas prices that started with a 6. Now, there's more to the cost of living than just gas prices. But my jaw legitimately dropped. We were walking, I remember, this was a year ago this weekend. My student media friends and I were there to cover IU's game against UCLA at the Rose Bowl. We were walking to the In-N-Out Burger near Glendale, which I believe was one of the higher crime parts of LA, and you could kind of tell. Fortunate that we traveled in groups, and we had plenty of dudes so that nobody messed with us. But we're walking near an overpass, and I turn and look at a gas station, and regular unleaded was like $6.40. And I'm thinking, man, this is Big Ten country? Really? It felt so strange, and it still feels strange. And UCLA was so bad this weekend that Reddit CFB put out a Twitter post and said, UCLA is considering a move to the Big Sky Conference after its subpar showing once again. And the Big Sky Conference's official account quote tweeted that and said, no, thank you. Not a parody account. The actual Big Sky Conference account said, no, we're good. We don't want UCLA. Ouch. Ouch. Remember, UCLA is directly responsible for the destruction of the Pac-12. UCLA and USC were the first two defectors a couple years ago. Basically, their argument was, we provide far more value to the conference than any of these other folks who do not reside in the second largest media market in the United States. So we want more money. Now, this was after the Pac-12 commissioner completely dropped the ball in negotiations with multiple television networks, including, of all things, Apple TV. They got laughed out of the room in all those negotiations, which is what led to USC and UCLA leaving the Pac-12. But the reason that those teams left was because they thought they were more valuable than everyone else and that they deserved to make more money on the media side of things. And I wonder how the Big Ten feels about adding them. Because on one hand, you've got the LA market. On the other hand, you've got one of the biggest laughing stocks in all of college football now representing your league and taking up late-night programming on BTN. This is one of the downsides of realignment is that when you have a massive conference like this, you're going to run the gamut. You're going to have juggernaut programs like Ohio State, like Oregon, but only in the regular season, like Penn State, which is the perennial redheaded little brother in the Big Ten. But hey, they're still a very successful program year in and year out. And then on the other end, you're going to have a team like UCLA that just doesn't know what's going on because they foolishly decided to give Nico Iamaleava $11 billion, an approximate figure, to stink up the joint and play in front of a crowd of fans, approximately 20 or 30, at the Rose Bowl. So I'm sure Indiana licking their chops for when Tino Sunseri, the former quarterbacks coach, comes back to Bloomington as UCLA's offensive coordinator in late October, if head coach Deshaun Foster even makes it that far. Only time will tell. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. The weather in Bloomington has been very weird to start the school year, my senior year. Holy cow, I'm old. It was unseasonably cool for the first couple of weeks, and then this past week, we decided that we're back in summer. And we've been in the mid-80s for the better part of the last few days. That'll carry through until this weekend. Very odd, because the first couple football games felt like fall. Felt like early October in B-Town, save for the leaves beginning to change color. And then it heats back up, and you're like, oh, yeah, we're only 3 weeks in. Which is fine. It's fine. That means we've got plenty more football to enjoy. But also one of the unfortunate things about this time of year is that there's a bug that always seems to go around. It's just the nature of a bunch of people from all over, not just the country, but the world, coming back together in one place and living in close proximity to each other. And I've been afflicted by it. I've got plenty of cough drops in my bag. Gatorade too, but it's tough, and I'm hoping that I, along with everybody else, can get healthy by this weekend. A little bit under the weather right now. And that's always something that you want to kind of keep in the back of your mind, because sometimes players getting ill, even if they're not necessarily unavailable, can have a negative impact on their performance. Although I'd imagine Division I football players have access to medical treatment that you or I probably don't, especially in the Big Ten. Talked about earlier how I'm still very puzzled that, I guess puzzled's not the right word. Flabbergasted, maybe, that Indiana does not get College Game Day this weekend. It's, like I said before, it's not even that Indiana isn't getting it. It's that it's going to Miami. And I know, the SEC and the ACC, media partners of ESPN. I understand that. And that is ultimately why. But there are objectively going to be two better games, at least. Texas Tech, Utah. They were pushing for it in Salt Lake City as well, saying, hey, bring game day to Utah. Bring it to Rice-Eccles Stadium. The Red Raiders and the Utes facing off. No. It's strange because you'd want to promote the best matchups for the sport. By the way, the get-in price for IU Illinois, $182. Ranking among the highest of all games in Week 4. The only one that really comes close, Texas Tech, Utah at $137. I'd expect those prices to drop a little bit as we get closer to game day. But man, game day not getting closer to Bloomington anytime soon. I wrote a column for the Hoosier Network, one of the IU student media outlets, and it's titled In Defense of Cupcakes, because we've had, for a while now, a lot of shouting from the proverbial rafters of college football saying, hey, Indiana, stop playing bad teams. Play a real team. But Indiana's non-conference schedule, even though the opponents aren't exactly going to sell out any stadiums, still matters. The games are still meaningful. And I know you're thinking, dude, Indiana just beat Indiana State 73-0. And I'd say, yeah, but that game still mattered. And the reason why is because Indiana is much more prepared now to take on the likes of Illinois, Oregon, Penn State than it was in Week 1. What happened to Alabama against Florida State? New quarterback, not new to the program, but new to the starting role, Ty Simpson. And the Crimson Tide stunk it up. People were calling for Kalen DeBoer's job. Those kinds of early season matchups where Clemson LSU is another one. Clemson, as we know now, Not very good. Clemson is just bad. Like, objectively bad. Brent Key's Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. That's what they do. They cause chaos. But also, Clemson is bad. They're not making the playoff, I can tell you right now. Cade Klubnik, underwhelming. Kansas State, the poster child for why you should never agree to play in Ireland. Kansas State off to its worst start since 2008. Arizona State losing to Mississippi State. Early season struggles are common in college football, especially in this era where, as we know, rosters are more akin to revolving doors than something that iterates year over year with a core establishing itself, leading the program, and then giving the way to some new guys who have developed under the watch of those who came before them. That's not the case anymore. Curt Cignetti especially subscribes to the philosophy of bring in a bunch of experienced players and coach them his way. That's why Curtis Rourke was so successful, largely in part. He was a sixth-year senior. He was so smart because he had so much experience. So in an era where teams need time to gel, playing those high-risk, I'm not going to say high-risk, but high-profile games early in the season, especially when you're in a conference like the Big Ten, you stand to lose much more than you stand to gain. Again, Alabama playing Florida State. Florida State dominating the Tide. People saying Kalen DeBoer should be fired. I will respond to that by saying you can take Kalen DeBoer away from Tom Allen's Indiana, but you can't take Tom Allen's Indiana away from Kalen DeBoer. Kansas State, I said, was overrated. And sure enough, they were. Florida, overrated. They didn't play a tough, at least what should have been a marquee early season game against USF. Although I need to give USF credit because the Bulls beat back-to-back ranked teams to start the season. However, you can argue, and you should argue, that Boise State never should have been ranked because it was clear to anybody that watched them last year, Ashton Jeanty doing what he did so well, which was just running over everyone, was the reason for the Broncos' success. Which, again, this goes back to my argument that preseason rankings are stupid and bad and need to go away. The point is, Indiana playing what was perceived as a soft non-conference schedule was ultimately a good thing. Sure, it's not going to light up any ratings, not going to have people glued to their TVs unless you're an Indiana fan. But it allowed Indiana to diagnose the problems that needed to be fixed. Curt Cignetti came in after week 1 and said, hey, none of us in this organization, none of us are pleased with the way we played. Fernando Mendoza left some plays out there. His timing was off. Indiana's red zone offense was putrid. 2 touchdowns and 7 trips to the red area, including a fumble and a couple goal line stands by Old Dominion. Indiana was not ready to play anywhere close to its peak potential in week 1. Week 2 against Kennesaw State, you're expecting this linear progression, and that's honestly exactly what you got. Missed opportunities on defense, chunk play opportunities, not all of which Kennesaw State capitalized on. But Cignetti stressed the communication, especially on the defensive side, was not good. The offense took a step against Kennesaw State. There's no doubt about that. But Cignetti wasn't satisfied, and he pointed to pre-snap troubles, getting lined up on time, some missed opportunities on offense, but he wanted more attention to detail. And that's exactly what he got against Indiana State. Not even just talking about the score. Indiana, again, as we talked about earlier, played a much more complete, multifaceted game where the offense was in rhythm. Mendoza was making throws on time where they needed to go. There were a couple decisions on option plays where he should have handed the ball off and didn't. But those are things that Curt Cignetti, as we saw on the broadcast, addressed with Mendoza on the field. Cignetti expected a dominant performance, and that's what he got. So to those who say that Indiana needs to play a real non-conference schedule, I offer you Curt Cignetti saying that Indiana just adopted the SEC scheduling philosophy. SEC teams play cupcakes in November. Tennessee, which, by the way, has already played ETSU, will play New Mexico State in November. Texas A&M will play Samford in November, and Georgia will take on the Charlotte 49ers. Tennessee's non-conference gauntlet, also featuring, as I said, East Tennessee State and Alabama Birmingham. Georgia faced Marshall and Austin Peay. So, to those of you, especially in the SEC, who point to those teams' schedules and say, look, this is what happens when you play real teams, I disagree, because those teams aren't any more threatening than any of Indiana's opponents. And I would argue less threatening than a team like Old Dominion, which, putting more dirt on top of Virginia Tech, the Hokies struggling mightily. Old Dominion straight up dominated that game yesterday. The Bluebirds were out in Blacksburg, but at least Virginia Tech has entered Sandman. Sure, they're 0-3, but they've got a cool entrance, right? Old Dominion led that game 28-0 at halftime as the Hokies dropped to 0-3. I said it after week 1. I feel like Old Dominion could give some people a scare in the Sun Belt. But getting back to the SEC cupcakes in November, at least Indiana plays those games early. It's all conference games from here on out. The Hoosiers can't control who they play in the Big Ten. Indiana didn't jump ship to join this conference. Indiana's been in this conference for much longer than any of us have been alive. Indiana needed those live reps. They needed game tape against other teams to figure out where they needed to improve. Now, Indiana is humming along. I think they're in a really good spot going into Saturday. There is a clear blueprint that Curt Cignetti has established here in Indiana. You tune up, and then it's not new at all. You tune up against admittedly poor competition, and then you're hoping that you stack enough wins and show the committee, hey, we belong. Indiana did that last year. The 66-0 win over Purdue was the icing on the cake. The biggest tests now coming in back-to-back weeks, I would say. One, Indiana has not beaten a ranked team at home yet under Curt Cignetti. Now, Nebraska was like 25th in the coaches poll, but coaches poll is stupid because it's a bunch of SIDs filling out a MailChimp survey. Indiana has not beaten a ranked team at home yet. Has not had a high-profile win at home against a really tough opponent that a lot of people are very high on. And then after that, you might say on paper Iowa's not a big test because, again, Iowa barely knows what a forward pass is. And I would say you're right, but Indiana needs to prove that it can handle a tough road environment because that hasn't happened yet under Cignetti either. Ohio State was decidedly Indiana not handling a tough road environment. Kinnick Stadium is a difficult place to play, no matter how good Iowa is. We saw that in 2021. I don't think we need to be reminded of that. But those are the two toughest tests for Indiana at this point in back-to-back weeks. We're going to know a lot about Indiana by the end of September. I think we're going to know even more than we do right now. So buckle your seatbelts because it's about to get fun. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rodecap with you. I never thought that Tom Allen's defense would be bested by Haynes King, the Georgia Tech quarterback, who I swear every time I watch a Georgia Tech game, Haynes King is taking a beating, just getting walloped every time he carries the ball. It's one of the most interesting ways of quarterbacking that I've seen in college football. It works for Georgia Tech. I mean, they're 3-0. Upsetting Clemson with that fire drill field goal. I mean, yeah. I think back to that, was that an 8 overtime game against Georgia last year in the Swamp where Tech almost beat them? But every time I see Haynes King, he is just getting battered. But Tom Allen searching for answers. And I did wonder about the move from Penn State to Clemson for Tom Allen, his post-Indiana trajectory. The move to Clemson seemed kind of interesting. He and Dabo Swinney, two of the more interesting personalities in college football. And don't get me wrong, by all things that I've seen from his time in Indiana, Tom Allen, clearly a good guy, just wasn't a good head coach. But moving from the Big Ten to the ACC, even going to a program like Clemson, it just kind of seemed like I'm not going to say lateral move, but certainly not one where you're moving to a conference that's got a ton of security, a ton of, I'm not going to say parity because the Big Ten doesn't have parity, but a lot of high-caliber competition. It was kind of puzzling to me. But Tom Allen, Dabo Swinney now searching for answers. Clemson 1-2 on the wrong side of the CFP bubble as of right now, especially because the ACC, not a high-caliber league, probably will be a one-bid league once again this year. And that's good for Indiana. Really good for Indiana. The Hoosiers, I think, still have a route to the CFP if they lose to Illinois. It's going to be very difficult because you're going to have to win out. Or you're going to at least have to, I'd say, beat either Oregon or Penn State on the road, which is going to be the case regardless, I think, of whether or not Indiana beats Illinois. But you're going to have I'm not going to say compelling. You're going to have an argument if Indiana wins against Illinois and then, say, goes into Autzen Stadium and beats Oregon. Very, very difficult task. But if Indiana loses to Illinois, you're probably going to have to win out to make the CFP. I don't think that that's actually a big stretch. There's a lot of unknowns. And again, that's why having a game like Indiana-Illinois in Week 4 is so cool, is because it has all of these potential postseason implications. And Illinois having one of its best seasons this millennium is really cool too. I think it's better when Indiana is in these types of games on a national stage. And sure, you think back to Ohio State last year and Notre Dame in the college football playoff. Indiana clearly did not have it against those two teams, which, as we would later come to find out, were by far the two best teams in college football last year. Illinois is not among that elite group. And Indiana will have a home crowd on its side this time. It's going to be so fun at Memorial Stadium. It's going to be under the lights. I get to shoot the game, so I'll be on the field. I'm so excited for this weekend. Got to get healthy, though, because this cold is causing problems. But Indiana taking on Luke Altmaier and the Illini. It's going to be a blast. And I'm hoping that we at least get a close game. I'm sure Indiana fans wouldn't mind a blowout, but as someone who's there covering the game as a neutral party, I'm hoping for a close game. And we can talk all we want about the metrics, the FPI, the AP poll, yada, 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 yada. But, by the way, Michigan being above Indiana in the FPI is something. Tennessee being above Indiana in the FPI, 7 spots above Indiana, after both teams beat the snot out of an FCS opponent. Tennessee losing to Georgia at home because of a missed field goal at the end of regulation and then losing in overtime. It's interesting. I'm not going to put too much stock in it because at the end of the day, winning cures everything, and that's what Indiana is always focused on. You're listening to IE Sports Sunday. Back here on IE Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. The Colts play football on WGCL today. Bo Nix and the Broncos coming to town in the battle of the two teams who lay claim to Peyton Manning's Hall of Fame career. 4:05 kick on CBS for the Colts, which, sure, I'm excited to not be in the 1 o'clock window for once because it feels like the Colts are always there. Interesting developments with the Colts and Daniel Jones. I wonder if Danny Dimes will lead the charge as well as he did against Miami, although I think that's more Miami being bad than anything else. It's nice, though, for Jones' sake, he finally has an offensive line and he's not running for his life. Kind of like Fernando Mendoza. Now, if Daniel Jones and that experiment goes sideways, maybe the Colts draft Fernando Mendoza. I wouldn't be opposed, although they'd probably find a way to ruin him too. You can find that Colts game right here on WGCL. 4:05 kickoff from Lucas Oil Stadium, which if I wasn't feeling under the weather, I would consider going to that game. I haven't been to a Colts game since they fell heartbreaking fashion in the final week of the 2023 season to the Houston Texans, knocking them out of playoff contention because Gardner Minshew threw a check down to Tyler Goodson on 4th and whatever, and Goodson dropped it, but also it was a bad throw, yada, yada, yada. It's in the past. As for Indiana, men's soccer looking to rebound after its first loss of the season. It was interesting because that's the second time since 2017 Michigan has faced Indiana in Bloomington when Indiana has been the number one team. Michigan has come out of those games now with a 1-1 draw in double overtime and a 3-2 come-from-behind win. That's pretty good. One of the goal scorers in that game for Michigan, Kyle Pearson. One of the coolest stories in all of college sports, didn't play his freshman season, and then his sophomore year he missed it because he was battling cancer. Michigan was on an overseas trip. Pearson got back, said something didn't feel right. His parents got him checked out, and Pearson spent last season away from the Wolverines battling cancer. He comes back for this year as an academic junior, but athletically, he's a freshman because he did not play in his first 2 years. Pearson scored his first career goal against Oakland in Michigan's last match, and then Pearson giving Michigan the lead 2-1 in the 71st minute. A perfect service into the box from Joao Ramos, and Pearson was there to head it home. One of the coolest stories that I've had the privilege to tell on any Big Ten Plus broadcast, and we had just done a sideline hit. Our sideline reporter, Josie Broyles, had just done a sideline hit on Pearson, and then 20 minutes later, he scores the go-ahead goal for the Wolverines. I thought that was pretty cool, even if it came at Indiana's expense, because on Big Ten Plus, we are, of course, neutral parties, but that's one of the cool things about IU and the city of Bloomington is not only do I get the opportunity to do this show, I also get the chance to work alongside some very talented folks and cover Big Ten athletics, and it's a privilege, and it's one that I am so thankful for. And I have no doubt that getting to shoot this Illinois game for the Hoosier Network, I'll be on the sidelines with a video camera, so if you see me rocking a photo vest on the sidelines, I'll be there. Maybe I show up on the broadcast, I don't know. Showed up on the Washington broadcast last year. That was pretty cool. But I get the privilege to cover big games like this, and it's something that I am definitely never taking for granted. This is my last year at IU Bloomington, but it's going to be a fun one. Curt Cignetti leading Indiana against Illinois in one of the first matchups between two ranked teams in the history of IU football at Memorial Stadium. That is going to be so much fun. Prime time on NBC. Don't miss it. You've been listening to IU Sports Sunday.